بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد الكبير الثامنة والخمسون number 58 سب الأنصاري رضي الله عنهم في الجملة. The author says is to insult and to revile and disrespect the Ansar في الجملة, in general. Yesterday, number 57, we read was Sabu Akabir Sahaba. He says is to insult the senior Sahaba. To insult the senior Sahaba. And now he mentions Sabu al-Ansari fil Jumla. He says to insult the Ansar fil Jumla, in general. In other words, when we say fil Jumla, then that excludes generalizing the insult. If someone insulted all of the Ansar and spoke down or spoke ill against all of the Ansar, then that's a different ruling. That's a different what? It's a different ruling. But fil jumla, if a person just spoke about the Ansar in general, then that's one thing. Okay? So we have all of the Ansar, then we have an Ansari, one or two, and then we have Sab al-Ansari fil jumla. So he says that this is a major sin. This is from the Kaba'ir of the sins in Al-Islam. وَلِيَذُ بِاللَّهِ قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم آية الإيمان حب الأنصار وآية النفاق بغض الأنصار. He says the Prophet ﷺ tells us the sign of Iman is the love of the Ansar. And the sign of nifaq, of hypocrisy, is the hatred of the Ansar. He then says, وَقَالَ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ, and the Prophet also says, لَا يُحِبُّهُمْ إِلَّا مُؤْمِنٌ وَلَا يُبْغِضُهُمْ إِلَّا مُنَافِقٌ. None loves the Ansar except for a believer, and none hates the Ansar except for a munafiq. We all know that both of these hadiths are in Sahihain. The author doesn't necessarily mention that. So it's a short and brief chapter. He says here, cursing and insulting, reviling the Ansar fil jumla is from the major sins. Now the dalil here states that the sign of nifaq, the sign that the actual is nifaq, and what's meant by nifaq is nifaq al-i'tiqad, is the nifaq of belief and not nifaq of actions. If I say don't drink with your left hand, but then I drink with my left hand, that's a type of hypocrisy. If I make a promise and I break my promise, that's a sign of hypocrisy, but it doesn't necessarily mean the sign of hypocrisy of belief. And what's meant by hypocrisy of the belief is that a person is not actually a Muslim at all. He's actual kafir inside, but he manifests Islam outwardly and openly. So the hadith that says the signs of a munafiq are three, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's talking about nifaq of the creed, but nifaq al-amal, and the other interpretations we've mentioned as well of that hadith. What's important is that this hadith here, ayatul nifaq, the sign of hypocrisy, is not talking about breaking a promise or lying or behaving in a certain way, but it's talking about someone who's an actual munafiq, is not a what? Not a believer at all, and he's hypocritically manifesting Islam. As we all know that hypocrisy is of two types, is nifaq al-amal and is nifaq of i'tiqad. Nifaq al-amal is doing something that's not too good, such as a sin, breaking your word, behaving in a certain way. You tell someone to do something, but you yourself fall into it. And then we have nifaq of aqidah, in which a person is actually does not believe in anything called Jibreel or Mikael or Yawm al-Akhir. It doesn't make no sense to me. Waliyadu billah, he says. But for a reason, a social benefit, some type of reason or some type of harm he wishes to cause, he says, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. Has a beard, has a thobe, but in actuality is not a what? Is not a Muslim at all. Waliyadu billah. So the hadith says the sign of nifaq is to hate the Ansar. So due to the fact that this is a sign for something, as if he says this proves that it's a major sin. Was nifaq is kufr akbar. And if it's not kufr akbar, then it's definitely what? A major sin. So therefore the sign of it is what? Hating the Ansar. And hatred of the Ansar is definitely going to be manifested in one's what? What one says, one way or another. Khayr, inshallah. So that's in brief. Al-Muhim, as we mentioned yesterday, the issue of talking about the Sahaba is something which is very dangerous. And it's something which is well known in the books of Islam, the rulings of it. If you curse the companions, if you mention their faults, if you say that Ali was better than Abu Bakr, If you say the Sahaba were sinners, there are details for all of these different rulings. All right, with regards to one's stance towards the Sahaba. And the stance of Islam is that you should love all of the companions and that you ask Allah to have mercy upon them all. The stance of Islam is that you don't look into their faults. You don't look into the personal issues that they had among each other, because they were men and they were women. The stance of Islam is that you do not accept narrations which are false and weak and bogus about the companions, that were made up, that were inaccurate. The stance of Islam is that when the Sahaba did fight and they did come together, they all wanted good. And they all had some type of reason or some type of excuse to fight. And they didn't just want to fight just for the purpose of fighting. But it was something that they saw was obligatory and mandatory to be done. And the only way of settling it was through violence. These are some of the major points that the Muslim must believe with regards to the companions of the Messenger of Allah, alayhi salatu wasalam, and that all of the Sahaba, Allah is pleased with them. Some of them are better than others. Some of the Sahaba are more virtuous than others. Khairin, inshallah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here in the footnotes, we have a lot of different fawaid with regards to what the people of past said regarding those who talk ill about the Sahaba. We won't mention right now. What's important is major sin number 58. He says, Sabu al-Ansari radiyallahu anhum fil jumla. هذا والله أعلم وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على عبده ورسوله.